Are you looking for an experience that will grow your teenagers' faith, increase their leadership skills, and teach them the discernment to engage with the world all around them, all while taking them on the adventure of a lifetime? I mean, who isn't looking for that? If your teenager loves fun, adventure, and wants to grow in their faith and leadership this summer, then send them to Excel's Summer Leadership Camp. Excel's Summer Leadership Camp is a 12-day experience for passionate young leaders looking to discover God's truth, to discern wisely, and live wholeheartedly. Your teenager will embark on a transformative journey in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where they'll build lasting friendships in the context of community, embark on thrilling adventures like camping, rock climbing, whitewater rafting, and they will receive expert training and certifications in categories like CPR and wilderness first aid. Each aspect of the camp is woven together to help them learn to discover truth, to discern wisely, and take godly action in the context of real-life situations. To learn more or begin an application, go to theexcelcamp.org. That's theexcelcamp.org. Hurry, because summer is just around the corner.
I think a lot of those roadblocks started, with that scenario I talked about with my mentor in high school and the failure there, and learning that another person's failure can only be a derailment for me if I have unforgiveness in my heart towards that person. And realizing that my unforgiveness towards him was holding me back.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Reclamation Podcast. I'm so excited to bring you today's featured conversation with Darrell Halk. Darrell specializes in helping people overcome roadblocks and derailments, and he shares his story from realtor to ministry and to everything in between on how you live in that work-life balance. So I know you're going to love this conversation. I'd love to hear what you found meaningful in this conversation, so you can look me up at twmilton.com on Instagram, or the Reclamation Podcast on Facebook with Tony Miltonberger. We'd love to hear some feedback from you. And without any further ado, here's my conversation with Darrell Halk. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Reclamation Podcast. I'm excited to bring you today's featured guest, Darrell Halk. Darrell, how the heck are you, man?
I'm good. Tony, how are you?
Good. Now, you are coming to us from Dallas-Fort Worth, and you're a Dallas fan. That's correct, right?
That is very correct.
So how do you feel? Let's get to the important stuff first. How are you feeling about the new head coach of your beloved Dallas Cowboys?
It's funny that a lot of my friends, when I told them that I wanted McCarthy, they scoffed at me pretty heavily. I think a lot of people around here wanted a college coach that had a winning record or whatever, but I just felt like McCarthy was the guy. I felt like he had the right, the right mentality, the right amount of anger that some of these guys needed to light a fire under him, and the coaches that he's bringing in right now are exciting me as well around him. And so I think he's the right guy, and I have since they officially fired Garrett, which was even before that, I thought McCarthy was the guy we should bring in. So I'm just pumped, dude.
That's awesome. And I do think that given the nature of the owner of the Cowboys, Jerry Jones, that you need to find somebody who's got a little bit some chops. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's where Jimmy Johnson was good, is that he had chops and he could tell Jerry to go back to his office or whatever. And I feel like McCarthy's going to have that same ability to say, "Hey, go, get out of here. This is my show. Let me run it."
So it's an interesting transition here, but one of the things that I've seen in the work that you've produced is that you are super passionate about mentoring people.
Exactly.
And I know that good coaching is super important in life, and then it's also important as we raise up the next level of coaches. How has your life been impacted by mentors, and then how is that playing out in the world that you live in today?
That's huge for me, man. I think if you were to tell me or ask me what is the main goal of my ministry, it's to mentor, or the main goal of my life is to mentor. And I think some of that goes back to when I was young. I wanted to be a youth pastor from the time I was 16 years old.
Yeah.
So even at that point, I was under a youth pastor who was mentoring me and walking me through things. And there was a moral failure that happened, and that really sent me for a loop in my life where I had been learning under this guy that I so respected, and he let me down. And I think we've all maybe been in that situation where someone we look up to let us down. that kind of sends us in a little bit of a spiral. And so that's what motivated me, is I wanted to be someone that people could look to and count on, to be a guide for them in their life. And then the next mentor I had after that basically looked me in the eye and said, find something else to do with your life. You're not called to this. You're not called.
You're not called to be a youth pastor?
Yeah, you're not called to be a youth pastor. You need to find something else to do with your life. And
how to win friends and influence people, right? Jeez.
Exactly. He loved me. I mean, I was his favorite. We had 4 interns, and basically that summer I got to make burritos every Wednesday for the kids, and I got to teach once. And so in the mentor department, I was a little bit lacking there early on.
So that's an interesting question, is you're sitting underneath the teaching of this youth guy who's a mentor to you, and he tells you not to do what you feel like is God's calling you to, which was to be a youth pastor. How do you live in the tension of those two realities as a young man? Because I think there's somebody out there right now who feels like the world's told them that it's not okay to be feeling the way they're feeling, but yet God's nudging them in a different direction.
I think because God was so clear with me in various different ways, whether it was restoring me after I had strayed and letting me know that he still had that calling on my life, or whether it was just that in that moment, I didn't want to hear what he was trying to tell me, that I just kept pursuing it. And so I decided what I was going to do is to go to a different church in town and to see if somebody there would be willing to mentor me.
So did you abandon the mentor who wasn't who wasn't walking with you on the path?
Eventually, yeah. I stayed there for long enough, I think, to learn the things that I needed to learn. And I informed my mom on my 21st birthday that I was going to be leaving our church and I was going to go to this other church looking for mentorship. And she was actually very upset with me, because this is the church I had went to when I was in high school. This is their church. The church that I was going to was not a place she was a fan of. But the problem came when I sat down with that youth pastor, and the previous youth pastor had already told him that I wasn't worth his time.
No, man, there's no church like church hurt.
Yeah.
There's no hurt like church hurt.
Oh, it hurt, man. It really did. I mean, some of the leaders at that church had been with me all through high school, walked with me through, the moral failure of my previous mentor and all that. And so they had been there. And so for them not to believe in me either, or even to take up for me, it hurt. But as that youth pastor from the new church sat across the table, we said, hey, I just want to see you be faithful. Come. I'm not going to listen to what anyone else has to say about you. Just come be involved. And as I need you, I will call you into leadership. And it turned out for the next 2 to 3 years, this man poured his life into me. He taught me how to be a husband. He taught me how to be a youth pastor. He taught me how to be a man, how to be a leader.
So that's an interesting question, right? What does it mean to be faithful? Because I know a lot of people wrestle, like even as a pastor, sometimes I preach, you just got to be obedient. But I think most people don't even know what that means. How would you define what it looked like for you to be faithful?
I think for what he wanted is for me to be consistent.
Okay.
Number one, for me to be there. And when I was called on to be available, and when I was needed to step up. And I think those were all the things that he was looking for, is that when the call came, that I was ready. And I went and I just engaged. And it was kind of cool because about 3 or 4 months ago, I got a chance to speak at that church again.
Wow.
So sitting in that same room that used to be the sanctuary, which is now the youth room. And I'm looking in that back corner and saying, you know what? On my birthday, I sat there, and that sitting in that pew right there changed my life. And the pew's not there anymore, but that corner is still there. And so it was kind of this like very emotional moment for me to say, here I am getting a chance to speak to students. Some of their parents were in that youth group that I got to mentor. So, some of my youth pastor who poured into me, his kids are sitting in that youth room. And I got really emotional after I taught, because I was like, man, this is the place where the previous 2 mentors couldn't. This guy took everything he could and just loved on me. And that was the biggest thing, is I needed a guy in my life who would love me and accept me the way I was, and call out the best in me. And that's what his name's Tim Ramsey. I want to give him a shout out because he is an incredible guy. He's in his 50s right now, still in youth ministry, killing it.
Well, and let's just be honest, to be in your 50s and still in youth ministry is no small task.
And the kids love him still. I mean, he's not on a cane yet. Like he's incredible. And I do too, man. Like I love the man for what he did for me. And I want to be that for other people.
Well, let's dive into that for just a second, Darrell, because you work in, you do multiple jobs, right? So you're in the real estate business and you mentor new agents, and you're also speaking, writing. You've got a couple of books. In your opinion, in your experience, what does it take to be a good mentor? And what should you expect from your mentor if you're being if you're the mentee?
Well, I mean, I think first you got to be there for that person. You know, that you have to be present. There has to be consistency on your part to be present in their life. All the guys that I mentor right now, I try at least to go to lunch with them once every 2 weeks, if not once every week. You know, there's only so many days in the week though, so they all understand like, hey, if I can't get him this week, I'm going to get him next week. And so number one, I think it's being present. Number two, I think it's calling out the gifts that you see in them. Because I think a lot of people have trouble embracing the gifts that God has given them. And if you can call those out in them, then I think they're able to see those more clearly. And then thirdly is sometimes giving them the hard word, not to discourage them, but saying, hey, you gotta tune up in this area or that area. If you've built a relationship of love, you can do that. But as in my case, in that second mentor, there was no relationship. And so to try to tell me to go do something else when there was no relationship, I couldn't receive that. So you got to be in a position where you can say the hard thing to them, but you've done that because you've built a love deposit account with that person by pouring into them and pulling the good out of them as well. It has to be both, and it can't be just negative. And not everybody is called to vocational ministry, but I hope that they feel that or learn that as we go. I'm not just going to tell them right out, that's not you, because who am I to say that? God's the one that needs to confirm that.
Right. And I love, one of the things I really appreciate about your story is that it feels like it intertwines between vocational ministry, where you've been working in the church, and what I would call a civilian job, right, outside the church. How do you see mentoring being different as a Christian? So you're a Christian mentor in a secular real estate business. How is that different than what you do with youth in the church?
I think the biggest thing is my main goal at work has to be the success of their business, but there's also that part of who I am, the loving, caring Christian man, the guy that's going to be there for guys, the guy that wants to see people know who Jesus is, that's going to bleed off. If Jesus is, they always say whatever in your heart is what comes out of your mouth. And so if my heart is truly for the Lord, that's going to come out of my mouth at different times, not in a way where I beat them down, because in church, it's free reign to talk about Jesus in any way we want. In my business, although both of my bosses are strong believers, one of my brokers, his grandfather and his dad were both pastors.
Oh, wow.
My other broker, both of his sons are pastors.
Oh, man.
Ours is a very different deal. I mean, we've watched Stephen Furtick's sermons in our sales meetings. I mean, it is a little bit of a different environment where I'm open to talk about my faith very openly.
Oh, sure.
That's not what my position is there. But I've had those opportunities, people to talk through problems in their marriage, or there's been guys in our office that haven't had father figures, that some of us that are stronger in our faith have been able to surround and be those kind of figures for them.
I get a sense talking to a lot of Christian leaders that mentorship and disciple making is, I'm going to use air quotes here, the new trend. It's an old practice. Why do you think in today's world that we live in, this has become such a mainstream part of what the church is doing today?
I think it's because it's also become what the mainstream of non-Christian but spiritual people are doing today. There's a lot of self-help, a lot of, guys out there who are speaking towards, hey, your better life and those kind of things. And so it's kind of the message of today. There's a lot of people struggling with anxiety and depression and all these things that are coming at people, attacking who they are. And so I feel like coming from every single direction, there's people who are trying to encourage those people out of that. And so I think the church has had to step up their game in a sense to that, because we have the real answer, right? We have the real hope that a lot of these people are looking for, the real joy that they can know even in the midst of their struggles. And so, I mean, I think it's part of who we are as Christians, is that we got to step up to the plate too. Not that these other messages aren't good. I mean, any truth is God's truth, right?
Right.
Truth can transform, but we have the message that can transform whole lives just from the reading of it. Like, they could just pick up the Bible and read it, and their lives could be different forever. I mean, that's power that no one else has. And so I just feel like we've risen to the occasion because everybody is rising to the occasion, but we just have the message that's the strongest. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes sense, and it resonates because there's a eternal hope in the message that we get to provide, and doing it through mentorship's a great avenue. One of the things that I see on your website is you really help people overcome roadblocks and derailment. It seems like that's been a passion point for you. Where did that stem from? How does somebody get on this path to be a speaker and author?
I think a lot of those roadblocks started, with that scenario I talked about with my mentor in high school, and the failure there, and learning that another person's failure can only be a derailment for me if I have unforgiveness in my heart towards that person. And so realizing that my unforgiveness towards him was holding me back. And so I think that was part of that journey, is that derailment was unforgiveness. And then another derailment in my life, and as I mentioned on the podcast that I did with Will that we talked about before we got on here, was losing my passion of basketball. And so that derailed me, and it made me try to think who I am. What is my identity?
Take us through that story, because I listened to that story and I was like, man, that was a tough one to swallow for me, and I was just listening.
Well, the big thing is, as I went into ninth grade, they did tryouts, and it was a 2-day tryout, and they picked 9 guys to be on the team on day 1, and I was one of those 9.
Wow.
And so,
you were a first round draft pick, baby. Let's go.
Draft pick, baby. Like it was a larger school, not super large, but a 5A school here in Texas, which is now the second largest size school in the state of Texas. So
wow,
good amount of students, and people who knew me. They knew me as a basketball player. I had played all in middle school. I had grown up playing. I was the kid when we were in city league stuff that I was averaging 20 points a game. That was just who I was. And so I wrapped up so much of my identity in that. So when I got picked in the top 9 in high school, I'm like, yeah, that's who I am.
Right.
And, but it was a slow decline from there, because in 9th grade, I ended up on the B team. And I started on B team and had a good season, but that was kind of, I guess, a foreshadowing of what was to come, because in my sophomore year, they put me in off-season basketball, and I ended up getting injured playing street ball.
Oh, man.
You're playing in the street, and you're running one direction. My foot got caught behind another guy's ankle and turned around complete 300 or probably 280 degrees, and I ended up on the ground. And my whole foot was purple from ankle all the way down the toes. I had tore some tendons and such, and tryouts was 7 to 8.
Let me ask you a quick question here, because I've got 2 sons.
Okay.
Right, and both of them play basketball.
Okay.
If you had to go back and do it over again, or if you were, if one of your kids was out playing street ball, would you tell them not to play, or would you still let them play?
Man, there's so many great memories of playing street ball. I don't know that I would tell them not to play, but if they're really, really good, like better than I was, maybe protect it. But I don't know. I
wrestle with that tension, right? Like, man, I want my kids to be kids, but I also don't want them to do what I don't want them to I don't want them to get hurt and ruin what they're doing other places.
I get the dad mentality of that.
It's such a dad problem, but Okay,
my
keep
daughter's
going
a
with the
high
story.
school,
Keep going.
yeah, my daughter's a high school athlete too, so I totally get it. But as a player, I want to say, hey, part of the fun of the game is playing
Yeah.
those street ball. So anyway, like when I
So you get
tried
hurt.
out, I was coming off that injury,
Mm.
and I think the coach maybe thought I was milking the injury a little bit, not wanting to go through off season. Totally wasn't the case, but that became his perception of me, is that I was lazy and I was sitting out, even though I had a doctor's note. I think he thought I should have came back sooner. So when we tried out, he told me, you're too slow and you can't jump anymore. And so those words resonated in my head. And so I watched all the videos about Michael Jordan getting cut from his high school team and all of that. And I was determined to come back day 2 and prove them wrong. Had a great day 2. They cut me.
Wow.
They asked me to be the manager. They're like, hey, if a spot comes open, we'll put you on the team. You can be manager. You don't have to sweep the floor, mop the floor. Just keep stats. I'm like, okay, I'll do that. Or I had to go back to PE. So I was like, okay, I'll do that.
Right. Hard pass on PE.
Yeah, hard pass. And day 2 of being manager, he was like, hey, go mop the floor. And my pride wouldn't let me mop the floor. And
Oh, man.
I got sent to PE. Junior year, tried out again. He hadn't forgotten that he had to send me to PE. Got cut again. And so it was just one of those identity things. So that was a roadblock for me. Had various other roadblocks, hard church situations. But, it's just like, if you can run down the other side of those, knowing that, hey, I made it through that and I feel stronger and God's been with me through that. If he can get me through that, he can get me through the next. We lost a baby, at 12 weeks in the womb still. And, I've been through a robbery where I was held at gunpoint. I mean, there's been some crazy stories in my life.
Dang, dude.
All that surrounds to the fact that God is still good and I'm still on the path. So,
okay. So that's a good question, right? Because I think that a lot of us wrestle with this idea that in the midst of my tragedy, God can still be good. Yeah. What does somebody like you who's navigated it seemingly fairly well, what does someone like you do to stay connected to the identity? And how'd you find that identity? Because so many of my listeners struggle with, like, who am I?
This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
I think that's the whole message of my book. No one really knows.
Yeah.
That struggle for identity, especially that happens from, high school going into college. Who am I going to be? What am I going to be? Who am I going to live for? What really matters? You're looking for job, you're looking for spouse, you're looking for identity. And I think in that search, I realized very quickly that every time that I would choose my direction, I would end up flat on my face.
Wow.
My favorite verse, I always say it's my favorite and my least favorite Bible verse, is Proverbs 19:21. It says, many are the plans of a man's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. And I had the planning part down really well.
Right.
I did it my way and I flat-faced. Did it my way, fell down. Did it my way, fell down. And even sometimes in trying to do what God wanted me to do, I was still doing it my way. And it under my power. I mean, this, you've been in ministry. There's days where you leave that pulpit and you're like, I did that on my own and it wasn't very good.
No, it's always horrible. It's always horrible.
And it in your heart, like I did that and nobody's impressed. And so, I mean, I felt like even in the context of doing what God wanted, sometimes it was his way. And that's the only thing that I have actually tattooed on my body. And I don't have many other plans of a man's heart because I know that well. I have the Lord prevails because I need to remember that it's about his purposes. And so when I find my identity in his purposes, I find that things go the direction that I need to be going. And if that's me working in the church, that's me working in the church. And if it's not, it's me working somewhere else, then it's still about his purposes. So my identity isn't found in what my title is, although that was hard to pull off that vocational pastor title.
Yeah, because how long ago did you leave ministry?
I left the
Vocational ministry, sorry, yeah.
in May of 18.
May of 18. Now, you wrote No One Really Knows. You wrote that book back in 2014, right?
2011, actually.
2011, okay.
Yeah.
2011.
I was still in youth ministry at the time.
So one of my experiences with writing like that is that as we mature, we would change things.
Yeah.
If you had to go back and add something to No One Really Knows in 2011, what would you add?
I think that's a good question, bro. I like it.
Thank you.
I think the biggest thing is I wouldn't have rushed it out so quickly. You know, you get excited about, hey, I'm going to write a book, and you find someone that'll actually let you publish it, and you're like, yes, and you just go nuts and you put it out so quickly. And although I had been writing that story since I was in college, I feel like there's things that weren't probably drawn out as well as I would have wanted. And then what I mean by that is like some descriptions of people or descriptions of scenarios that I could have probably elongated. The book's only 130 pages, and that was on purpose because I wanted non-readers to read it.
Yeah.
But I also think that there's some of the scenarios that had I had elaborated a little more or painted the picture more than told them exactly who this person was, that it would have been better experience for the reader to say, oh man, I know exactly who that guy is. I have that guy in my life. And really that's what I wanted, is because as I've said a lot about No One Really Knows, it's not this fantabulous story of all these crazy things that happened to me. It's a story that everybody can relate to because most of us have been through these things. And I wanted a story that was relatable.
Do you feel like that what you're sharing there about the story and letting it, my word, not yours, marinate a little bit longer, do you feel like that's a reflection of your walk with God? I mean, is that spiritual maturity there too? Because it sounds a little bit like it might be connected.
Well, yeah, I think that's just a picture of who I am sometimes with my relationship with God. I have to be really open with him and say, God, you know I'm a door kicker, and I'm going to kick down doors. So close them really tightly if I'm not supposed to walk through it.
Amen. Amen. That'll preach to me every day of the week.
So, and then I'm like, but God, you also know I'm a little dense. So open them really widely if I'm supposed to walk through them. But I've always been the kind of person, because for so long I was told all the things I couldn't do, that I was going to go prove everybody wrong and do all of the things that I want to do. And my wife has to tell me, hey, Darrell, how many of these things can you do at once? Because you're good at all of these things.
And your answer is all of them, babe. Of course.
I'm a little ADHD. I got to do all
I
of
got to do
these.
something, right?
Yeah. But I think that's the good thing, is she's a calming force in my life too, is to say, hey, you know, dial it down. You can do all these, but take your time. And I wish I would have listened to her on the book, just because that's kind of was her. She's an English teacher, so she was helping me edit it, and I was rushing her. And finally, she said, "Here, just take it back." You know, she was like, "Don't rush me, or you're not gonna have a good edit." And so I was just like, "All right," you know. And so then I went and had it published, you know. And so I think I should have listened to her in that regard. Spiritual discernment is her gift, number one. Number two, she's just a really smart lady. But yeah, I think that's just part of my journey with God, has been trying to kick down doors he didn't have for me, and needing really clear flashing lights to walk through doors that he did have for me. And for whatever reason, he's always been very clear when I had to transition because of that.
So you've transitioned a couple times since 2011, it looks like. And how would you describe what you're doing now? I mean, how would you describe your call, or the path that God has you on? If I were to say, Darrell, what are you doing right now?
Confusing. I actually sat down with the lead pastor of my church a few weeks ago and said, man, I'm just confused. Like I said, I still have a passion for vocational ministry. I still have I'm at the same church that I spent my last 5 years in vocational ministry serving at. So we're still in that body, still watching what God's doing. And I'm like, I'm still passionate about Cross Timbers Church. I'm still involved with so many different things, but there's this part of me that wants to be on staff, but then I look at the the listing of jobs, and they're all interns. And I've been there and done that about 20 years ago. And I was like, I just don't know what I'm doing. And he just looked at me. He's like, man, it sounds like God's letting you do everything that you're passionate about right now. He goes, I don't know. I'd love to have you back on my staff, but why would you want to all the constraints of the staff when God's already allowing you to speak at other churches and at our church? He's allowing you to mentor all these young guys. He's allowing you to mentor people outside. And I was just like, like it does, and so it's confusing at times because I still have passion for ministry. I wasn't mad, burnout, or like mad at my church or ready to go. It was a split second thing that happened over 4 weeks where I was out of ministry. And I hadn't looked back until about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, and just had to re-clarify where I was.
That's super interesting, and I really appreciate your vulnerability and honesty on it. Confusion is one of those things that happens to a lot of us. If you were going to give some wisdom on what to do in the midst of your confusion, like, do you have a game plan, or how do you recommend that people deal with confusion when it comes to their relationship with God?
The big thing is that prayer that I mentioned earlier. I mean, I am a faithful prayer of that because, again, I know that I tend to run ahead sometimes and lag behind sometimes. And so I do pray that very consistently. God, open doors widely that I need to walk through, close them tightly that I don't need to walk through. And I was praying that throughout even that conversation. I had the conversation with my real estate boss, and I had the conversation with my pastor. And when I left the real estate boss's office, I'm like, man, I feel really good about staying here at the office. But what if I go and sit down with my pastor? And he's like, yeah, come on back. And then I was like, then what am I going to do? But
right.
I feel like because I was faithful to pray that, close that door when my pastor says, I love you, you're great. But God's letting you do what you need to do. From what I can discern, you need to stay right where you're at. And it was just this confirming message that all flowed together because I was open to what God was saying, even though probably in my mind, I wanted to go back. And so I've had that experience a couple different times, enough to know that that I need to be faithful to pray during those moments. And I need to be faithful to seek out counsel that's wise. Not just my buddy that's going to tell me that I'm awesome, but someone who is willing, like my pastor was, to say, hey, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you chasing things when God has given you all of this? And so we need people in our lives that can tell us the truth, but wise truth. And so I think seek wise counsel, pray, and make sure you're connected to God, because you make really bad choices unconnected to God, or at least I do.
Oh, yes. Yes, 1,000 times yes. No, I love that. Faithful prayer, faithful mentors, stay connected to God. And I think that's an incredible list. So, we're recording this. It's early January. You've kind of just confirmed that you're a little confused, but God still got you on a path. What does 2020 look like for you? Are you a guy that's going to go out and set out a bunch of SMART goals or resolutions, or what does that look like for you?
I'm definitely a person, especially on the real estate sales side, that sets out SMART goals and goals of that nature. But as far as like the path of my life, I do know 100% that this year is going to be spent without me in vocational ministry now. Just some of that clarity has been really open. But some of the things I do want to invest my ministry hard in is to continue to mentor these 6-7 guys that God has put in my path to work with and to build into. A couple of them are on our staff at church. We have a really cool program at our church named after a missionary that was a pastor that was in Uganda, called the Pastor Dongo School of Ministry. And we have interns that come through that program 3 times a year. And so I've been given the blessing of every single time a class comes in, they give me at least 1, if not 2, of those students to mentor. And so my list of mentoring is growing, which is awesome. I don't have to go find them.
Right.
They're just giving to me. And I'm sure at the church they're prayed over and they're like, okay, do we really want to trust Darrell with this guy? But I don't know if I get the bottom of the barrel or the good ones. I'm not sure, but I love all 6 or 7 of them that I have right now. And so, I think it's going to be a lot of mentoring. I plan on writing my 3rd book. Flushing Fear. And it's based on a story of when I was rolling into a restaurant and I kicked a lady and I hid in the bathroom.
Oh, man.
And I was hiding in the stall because I thought she was going to destroy me. And there's a lot of times when we are rolling through life and we're trying to achieve something, we're trying to hit our goals, or trying to get in the right relationship with God, that we hit an obstacle. And then we begin to hide in fear, and we begin to hide in the stall and wait for that to go away, and then we miss our opportunity. And so I just want to challenge people to stop hiding. If you have a dream, if God's put something on your heart, to chase it, and not to allow those derailments or those roadblocks to get in the way of that. And so that's what the book will be about, Flushing Fear.
When's that coming out?
Don't know, but I'm telling a lot of you guys here on podcasts, so I'll make sure that I have to get it out.
And there's nothing like public accountability.
Exactly, but I'm working on it right now. I got chapter titles, and I got some of the guidance of those chapters, but there's no book yet, to be honest. But the idea is there, and all the chapters are there, and the chapter summaries are there, and now it's just time to write.
Now it's just the hard, tedious, long, not fun part.
Yeah. I mean, I enjoy writing, and I don't.
Right. It's a labor of love, right?
Yes, exactly. And then as you are doing right now, I mean, I plan to launch a podcast called Outside the Stalls as well, to try to tie in all the messages, and to be about stories. Kind of what you're doing here with me is to share the stories of people who are living outside the stalls, who have been through things that have caused them to maybe retreat or get distracted, or to fall off the road, and knowing that the Christian message is, and when we fall off, we got to get back up, that God's welcoming us back. And so I just want to share some of those stories, because I think we learn a lot through the stories of others. And so that's what Outside the Stalls will be, is just a podcast that's about stories of people who have overcome fear and accomplished some pretty cool stuff, whether it be in the Christian realm or in the business realm.
Why do you think that right now is the time to share the message? Because I feel like I'm hearing this in a lot of different places, to overcome fear.
Because I think so many people allow that to cripple them. And I hear that everywhere I go, just like people that they really have a dream to do this, but they're doing that because fear hasn't allowed them to step out. And I think we all have opportunities just to curl up in a ball and give up. Every one of us has bumps in our story, or times where we tripped and fell, or times when something was stolen from us, or we experienced loss, or we experienced someone who tells us that we're not good enough, or, we all have these things that have been thrown at us, rightfully or unrightfully. And we all have the opportunity, though, to get up and to keep going. And I just want to be a message of hope, to say, hey man, I've tripped a lot of times, and I'm going to keep tripping. But I don't want to let that keep me from doing what God wants me to do, no matter what that looks like. And I want to be an example of that. And I feel like if I put myself out there more, then I'm going to have to be an example of that. Again, it's that accountability you spoke of. Like,
yeah,
I need that.
I need a little public, check every now and then. Yeah. I agree. Some of the best ways for me to make sure I'm going to do something is for me to preach about it.
Yeah, absolutely. You learn, the things that you're learning are the best things for you to preach about.
Right. Every once in a while I'm like, hey guys, this sermon, well, it's really for me, but I hope somebody else enjoys it.
But that's the humility that your people need. And so I just challenge you to keep doing that.
Yeah.
When I hear my pastor, that's what I love about his name's Toby Slough. He deals with anxiety and depression, and he's been so open with that. And I think it's changed the landscape of our church, because he is such a vulnerable but yet strong man of God. And so just keep doing that, man. I just encourage you. Like I set up on your story and watched the video of the transition y'all made at your church.
Yeah, God's done some lot of cool
really
stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
Really cool, man. I think you're doing some cool stuff over there. And so
well, it's all God. I just get to show up sometimes. So I do have one more question for you, but before we do that, I know that my listeners are going to want to find you on the interwebs. Where can they find you? Where can they poke you about this new book coming out? All the things.
Where can they hold me accountable? Yes. I do have a website. It's more of a blog, but it allows you to interact.
Yeah, the Bald Man Chronicles, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Love it. I loved it.
So every once in a while, I will blog on there, but the main purpose is to have links for all the things that I'm doing. So if you want to learn about speaking, or you want to learn about the schedule where I'm speaking, book me to speak, all that is at www.darrellhalk, and it's DARRELLHALK.com. And so you can link to me almost anything that I'm doing, you can link to at that page.
Oh, it's awesome. And we'll link to that in the show notes for sure.
And I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, you name it. I'm there. I'm the only one with the spelling of my name. So it's too hard to find.
That's nice.
I love it. 2 L's, and I'm not the bird hawk. I'm HALK, like walk, talk, chalk. So it's easy to find me. So just look me up. I don't mind random friends. It's another opportunity to tell our stories to one another. So
amen. Amen. I love that. Okay. Last question. I love to ask people is if you could go back, let's go back to freshman year, right? Freshman year, you made the basketball team, you get hurt, and you're in that season of your life is getting ready to drastically change. If you were going to give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think number one, I wish I would have still kept playing baseball too, but that's just how
diversify your portfolio.
Your portfolio. Actually, it's funny that we say that, but I'm doing that to my daughter right now. She's a freshman. Softball's her main sport, but I've made her continue to play tennis because I'm like, until you make varsity on one of these, you got to diversify.
Right?
Living out of my hurt. So, but I would say basically, I would tell myself, number one, to keep focused on Christ, because I think, it was a year and a half later that I lost, basketball. It was a year and a half later that I lost my prime mentor. And both of those things pulled my focus from who I was. If you would have asked people freshman year what they would call me, they would have called me the Reverend. They would have called me the goody two shoes. I was that guy. And then I let those two things really take me on a journey that I didn't want to go on initially, and down some roads. And that's what no one really knows, talks about kind of some of those journeys that I took away from the Lord, and then realizing my identity in him and coming back. And so I would just tell myself to stay focused on the right things, because I allowed two derailments to pull me off. And again, that's my message so strongly to people now, is because that was me then. And I just don't want to see people do that the way that I did.
I love that. Well, Darrell, thank you so much for taking the time today. Thank you for the gift of your vulnerability and your transparency and your writing and your humor. And it's all there. So everybody, I would just tell you, go check out Darrell's blog, and we can all subscribe to his podcast once that gets up and running. And I think that you're going to find a tremendous gift in his ability to tell stories, make us laugh, and be incredibly relatable along the way. So Darrell, thanks again. I really do appreciate the time.
Tony, man, I appreciate you letting me be on here. Thanks a lot.
I know that you love this conversation with Darrell as much as I did. I really appreciate the way he helps people overcome some of those mental barriers that we all face in life. And I know that you've been where I've been, and that together we can do something different if we can embrace some of this methodology and thought process that Darrell is giving us. So do me a favor, go follow Darrell on all the social media channels. We'll link to it in the show notes. You can also hit him up on Instagram and Facebook, and it's just good stuff. So if you've got any questions, let me know. You can find me almost everywhere on the internet. On Facebook, The Reclamation Podcast with Tony Miltenberger. On Instagram at TWMilt. My website, twmilt.com, where you can sign up for weekly emails letting you know that the podcast has dropped. That way you're for sure never to miss an episode. Rate and review this podcast anywhere that you listen. As always, our goal is to help you reclaim good practices for faith and life.